One of the things that folks notice, since we're in our homes here in Zoom, we often get to see little things about each other's living space. We get familiar with the dish cabinet behind Steve or behind Jackie, or, Pamela's got some beautiful photos there set up in her altar, and we see your four-legged creatures come and go, and we see things like in your houses. And one of the things that you always comment on in my house are my books. Wow, do you read all those books? I mean, what a collection of books. And so on this day of celebrating ancestors, I want I kept looking at this back here thinking, that looks vaguely familiar to me. And it looks vaguely familiar to me because of this. This is why it looks familiar. Um, this is my mother, and she is in her library. My mother was a junior high librarian for much of her teaching career, and probably the last 26 years of it. And she was a great lover of books. Now, she also loved to do ceramics and to make ceramics. And she went with some other teachers from the school where she taught. And 2 evenings a week, they would go and make ceramic things. And she made the most creative, cool things, a couple of which I still have. But these are little ceramic eggs that she made that have little pipe cleaner hands and feet, like they're in, one of them she's got upside down here. And she was famous for decorating her library with these things that she had made. So, as I think back about her this morning, I celebrate that sense of creativity that she gave me. And I also celebrate all those books that are behind her, because that is a very familiar thing in my household, as you can see. Now, when I was a kid, she did everything she could to make sure that I had books. She would bring me, books from the book fair. She would order me books, and I would blow through them because I read everything. And then I would get bored, and I'd start pulling down my dad's books off the shelf. And this caused a little bit of consternation because some of them were antique books of his from the Masonic Lodge that women were not supposed to be reading, and Albert Pike and this kind of stuff. And I read it anyway, and it's kind of formed the foundation of a fascination with such things as that. But reading in my household was an important thing. It was something that both of my parents did, and they were really the first generations in their families that did a lot of reading, and privileged education as an important thing. And so as we enter into our conversation about ancestors this morning, I want to celebrate that in my mother. I want to celebrate that love of books that she gave me. And I also want to lift up her anxiety when she saw some of the things I was reading that she wasn't sure about uh, this morning, because, sometimes that kind of thing is in the water with our ancestors too. So yeah, I'm going to give you all a chance to share some of your stories and things in a minute. But our Hebrew word this morning is ancestor. And it's interesting because I always love to look at the definitions of these things, because I think they can create different containers or thresholds or windows into ways to think about things. And so I want to share again, the Hebrew word for ancestor, according to Strong's, means progenitor, root, point of origin, or lineage. And you can see that point of origin in my love for reading in all those books behind my mother in her library. there. And so that's the kind of point of origin that I'm talking about. Where's my love of reading come from? That's where it comes from. That's the point of origin. So, and it's also demonstrative of a lineage. She loved she loved books and was very proud of her library and loved what she did. And she passed that on to me. And my son also has been, he's in 5th grade and he is blowing through those Harry Potter books that are, this thick. He reads a little bit every night. And I think he's in the 7th one now, which there are 7. So, I see that being passed on to him, which is also what we're talking about here this morning. As we look at lineage, that came from my mother, and it came from her mother also, who didn't get to go to college and loved to read the newspaper and read articles about things. One of Grandma's favorite sayings was, I read an article about such and such. And she didn't get to go to beyond high school, but she loved reading and she loved to read the paper. And so she instilled that in my mother, who took it further and got a college and a master's degree in library science. And so that flow of love of books and love of reading came to us, in different ways. And I love seeing it in my son in yet a different way. So I want you to be on the lookout for those things in our conversation this morning. And want to start with a little piece of Psalm 78, which is usually the scripture that shows up in ancestral celebrations in churches. Which one of the interesting things, to know about All Saints, or there are several holidays that kind of coalesce this time of year. If you raise children, as I do, you know that Halloween is the first high holy day of the holiday season. The holiday season does not start at Thanksgiving. It starts at Halloween. And so we're gearing up for that, getting the costume together, getting, we got the pumpkins, we got to get pumpkins, we get the pumpkins out. And because Clive knows that there are certain things that need to happen at that time. And so you have Halloween, which the kids are all over. Some adults are all over it too. You have the more ancient holidays that neo-pagan people celebrate, such as Samhain, which is a Celtic holiday that marks the change of the seasons, particularly, and also celebrates ancestors. And then as the church came in and was trying to get all that under control, they made up a whole new holiday called All Saints, where the saints, the dead, could be celebrated. The church was really good at this. Anytime we have a major holiday going on, there was usually a pagan equivalent that they were trying to kind of match up so everybody would buy in. And we definitely see that with this weekend, with All Saints and Samhain and Halloween and all the traditions that are around that. So I invite you to Google if you're interested in all that, because that syncretism that happens sometimes is very, very interesting. And it also explains a lot of things about what we're doing with pumpkins and what we're doing with dress up, the masking, what all that's about. So I invite you into that if you're interested. I want to begin with Psalm 78, which is one of the scriptures that shows up on All Saints and in All Saints celebration pretty frequently. And just kind of read through this. The sense that you get here of the Jewish idea of lidor vodor, or from generation to generation, is very strong in this scripture. And so I want you to listen to that, how things are passed from generation to generation and how that's important. All right. Give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. You thought all the parables were in the New Testament, didn't you? I will utter dark sayings from of old, things that we have heard and known that our ancestors have told us. We will not hide them from their children. We will tell to the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders that he has done. They have established a decree in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our ancestors to teach to their children, that the next generation might know them and the children yet unborn, that they might rise up and tell them to their children, so that they should set their hope in God, and so they will not forget. What in your ancestral lineage do you not want those who come after you to forget? What, on the other hand, might you prefer that everybody would forget? There's there's that part of it too. I mean, this psalm really captures that tension, and it goes on. It's quite long, and it goes on, and it talks about some of those things that the people might really kind of like to forget. You know, it lifts up God. It lifts up the good things. It lifts up Jacob, who we're going to hear a little bit about in a bit. But it also later on goes on to capture those tensions. So I want you to be aware of that. I was thinking about, Jackie mentioned at the beginning, was it Jackie? I'm sorry, my brain gets spongy when I'm preaching. About how the ancestors, we have our ancestors this morning that are blood ancestors who you may know really well or you may not know at all. You have adoptive ancestors. You have, something that happens a lot in the LGBTQIA community. We get kind of shoved out of our childhood homes. And so we end up adopting all these people as our families. So there's that kind of, there can be that kind of ancestor or family. They're also our spiritual ancestors, which Jacob and the psalmists are our spiritual ancestors this morning. Jesus is our spiritual ancestor. So it's important that we remember that. And, thinking about the tensions, I was reading about some of the work that is going on in Hawaii to undo the legacy of colonial mission work that happened in Hawaii that really kind of overran the indigenous traditions there. And there's some reconciliation work that's going on there, conversation with the indigenous folks, and hearing their stories and their anger and those tensions that happen. That's a legacy in the United Church of Christ. That's there are beautiful, if you go to Hawaii, I mean, we were in Kauai not that long ago, and there are United Church of Christ congregations all over the place. It's a small island, but there are lots. And that's because the missionaries did a really good job of what they were doing. And they also were destructive. And so we have to be aware of that. That's something in our United Church of Christ legacy that might be uncomfortable for us to talk about, but it's very important that we do talk about it, and that we hear the stories and experiences passed on through the indigenous Hawaiian people who are telling how that affected their ancestors and is still affecting them. So, I invite you. It, it, ancestral stuff is a mixed bag. There's in the New Age movement today, the ancestors, it's kind of like, oh, I'll just invite in my ancestors. And I mean, I think, man, I would not want some of those people in here. I'm not just going to freely invite in my ancestors. And yet, some of the things, like what I was talking about with our UCC ancestors, we need to bring into the room. Need to bring it up out of the shadows and into the room so it can be dealt with. So there can be a movement toward justice and reconciliation. Justice is another word that shows up in the Hebrew Bible a lot. We might talk more about that and the tensions with it. But here's a great example of this idea of passing something on from generation to generation and the tensions that are inherent in that. And we may hear some of those tensions a little bit later here when you tell some of your stories. I want to move on and highlight this story with Jacob because it's so rich and so beautiful. Couple of things I want to say about this. This story contains an image of this ladder to heaven that Jacob dreams about. And there's this idea in many religions that God is up here and we're down here. And then the priests and priestesses sometimes can transverse that. Literally, that happens sometimes in architectural ways. I had a picture. I'm not going to try to share it because I'm having too much trouble sharing stuff today. But we stood in Mexico at the bottom this summer of the Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, which is it's this pyramid-shaped structure with these stairs that go all the way up on four sides. And they've restored the stairs on at least one side and then left them kind of how they are. There have been restorations attempted. But it's absolutely amazing to stand at the bottom of that and to look all the way up. And then there's a little place on the top, and there are some important things in there that the priests would go up and down and navigate, because God was up there. The gods in Mayan tradition were up there, and the people were at the bottom. One of the other things in this part of the world where these stories come from that the people would have been familiar with were ziggurats. A ziggurat is a stepped pyramidal structure built in Babylon that would have been familiar to the people. Babylon, that whole area, the Babylonian, what became Babylon, it wasn't Babylon at the beginning, but those ziggurat structures would have been familiar to them, and that was a symbol of how people are at the bottom and the priests are at the top. The priests navigate, and then God is up here. And I think you're seeing a little bit of that tradition today, and that idea too that of ascension, which we've talked about. But this story is interesting because it kind of undoes that. And this is what I want to show you. Jacob left Beersheba and went to Haran. Okay, so Jacob has betrayed his brother Esau. He has stolen his birthright. Jacob is a character that we really ought to just spend a few Sundays with Jacob, because the story is amazing. And Jacob is also kind of not a very nice guy in some of the scriptures. And yet he's one of the ancestors, one of the fathers of Israel. Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran because he was running from Esau. And he came to a certain place and stayed there for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. And he dreamed that there was a stairway set up on earth, the top of it reaching heaven. And the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Okay, here's the subversive part. And the Lord stood beside him and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, grandfather, and the God of Isaac, your father. The land on which you lie I will give you, and your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth. And you shall spread abroad to the west, and the east, and the north, and the south, from generation to generation. And all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Do you hear that first sentence? You know, we've talked about how the priests and priestesses of these traditions would ascend and talk to the gods. You have this in Jewish tradition when Moses ascends Mount Sinai and receives the 10 Commandments. And we talked in Bible study about that story in Exodus where Moses goes up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, like 7 or 8 times, and which may be evidence of redaction or editing that was going on in the text. Or maybe he really went up and down that many times. We don't know. And the Lord stood beside him. There's no necessity for priests to navigate between the bottom and the top. Do you hear that? The Lord stood beside him, with him, next to him, in us. You know, it's interesting because one of the things that's really important to us with Jesus is this idea that he was fully divine and fully human. In us, with us. Emmanuel, God with us, standing beside us. Here you have an example of God not staying up here at the top of the ladder, but coming down to be with Jacob beside him. I think that's remarkable. Know that I'm with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you as I have done what I promised you. We have talked about how covenants, the covenants in the Old Testament are a little bit different. Some of them are about laws, like the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, or they may be about later on. You'll hear talk of of a covenant or circumcision of the heart. That's, I think, in Isaiah, you know, so that's a different kind of covenant. And here we have covenants that are about land and progeny. And Jacob is very big on land and progeny. And he's also, the important thing about Jacob's story is that the shrine that his people, that was important to them, was at a place called Bethel. And that's what we are seeing the establishment of. I was going to find Bethel means gate to heaven or house of God. And so when Jacob took this stone, and in a later part of this story, he takes the stone that he's been sleeping on and he sets it up. For those of you who've never heard of such a thing, if you've seen Stonehenge, if you've seen Callanish, where they took stones and they sat them up to mean something, that's what's happening here. We have and then this happens throughout the Hebrew Bible, the setting up of the stone to say God is present here. And the last thing I want to say about this that I think is really important is this is a totally ordinary place. Get there at the end how Jacob does not recognize that this is a holy place. He didn't go out there and say, oh, this is a holy place. He was like, I'm so tired from running from Esau, who I have messed over, that I'm going to lay down here and sleep. I'm going to rest here. And notice all this effusion that goes on at the end where he says he woke up from sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place. And I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and it is the gate of heaven. So he ends up setting up this stone or this monument that becomes this religious place for the next generations in his family, called Bethel. But the thing I want you to take with you in this is he didn't know it was a holy place. It was a totally ordinary place. And yet in the ordinary place, in what he thought was an ordinary sleeping night, which is actually a little out of the ordinary because he's running from Esau. But I want you to notice this because God shows up in the ordinary, in ordinary places, and those places become holy. Where has God shown up in your ancestral lines and made something holy that maybe you're holding with you today? Where can you find the presence of God there? How do you mark it? Jacob set up a stone. And that's not just there. That happens all over the world. I was talking about, the UK and the standing stones there, because those are my ancestors. And so where have your ancestors set up stones? Where has the ordinary become holy in your life? Around the kitchen table, maybe, or out in the parking lot? I invite you into conversation about this now as we begin to share our stories about our origin points and our ancestors.